We're back again here for another edition of the program called What's Going On Flint Talk Radio's top number one program. And we are here to continue our discussion from last week. We were talking about how the assassination of John F. Kennedy would have played into a number of other developments that occurred, and we were tying it into what occurred in 1965, 2 years later, with the assassination of Malcolm X. And there are a lot of books you can read about that. I think that one book we need to make sure we emphasize, we did talk about it last week, but a book we need to emphasize is the book written by the great civil rights writer. um, I think he doesn't get a lot of credit, but his 4 volumes on the civil rights movement, starting with Parting the Waters, and that's a very volume. These are volumes that are written. That's the first volume, and then volume two, that's the one I was talking about last week. I was talking about Pillars of Fire, and that's written both those books, and then the other two written by Taylor Branch. And if you read Taylor Branch, one thing I like about him as a writer is that he goes, he's a little bit more, he's a little more like I am. I'm not a linear uh, thinker where you uh, write down the line and this A and then point B. That's how they teach it in university. But I like the way he goes into a number of other areas and then bring everything into the common discussion we're having about the King years. And then you hear something about you could bring in Paul Robeson, just a lot of other characters that you would not bring in who were not, because they were not directly involved in what occurred in the southern states, which is pretty much where the civil rights movement was taking place at that time under King. And he brings in a lot of other things and prior to that movement and so on, and tie these things together so you can see the connectiveness of different events. And we were saying last week that the Kennedy assassination, you can go a little bit wider and see that it has a more comprehensive type of understanding of what really occurred and some of the fallout from it, from other events that happened very much away from the actual event in Dallas. And I think that Malcolm X piece we did last week is a good indication of that, because you would not think that the assassination of Malcolm X had anything to do with, doesn't tie in with what occurred with John F. Kennedy in 1963. But it does tie in the sense of what we did last week in terms of it ties in the sense that comments were made about it, and that set a whole number of other things in place away from the assassination itself, but it plays into it because without that having occurred, it would not have given cover for what occurred in the Nation of Islam, in which Malcolm X would eventually be um, martyred. Let's say martyred in his case. 2 years later, Malcolm X was assassinated, but the JFK assassination was the excuse to rid the Nation of Islam of Malcolm X. And I think it's kind of like he was really, when I think about it, it was like him loading up the gun and handing it to his enemies inside the Nation of Islam and giving him the gun to shoot him with, because he knew they were out to get him. And for him to make a comment when he'd been told to be quiet, and then to set up the condition to which he would make a comment that was spoken out of season, and he'd been ordered not to comment on the assassination of Malcolm X, and his enemies inside the Nation of Islam were going to use anything they could to get him out of there, because he was a threat inside that organization. His what do I want to call it? His demeanor, his honesty in terms of wanting to rectify the problems that he felt he could in fact help overcome among blacks. I think that being this spirit set on fire, some people have a flame inside of them. They want to do what they claim they're trying to do, and they're very true to it. And sometimes that could be a problem if you're in an organization that's less sincere than you are, and you're trying to affect the outcome, and they're talking about it, but you're trying to affect it, and that contradiction in terms of how you are carrying out the ends of what you claim, some claiming it and talking about it, and others claiming it because they want to actually do it, that could be a conflict. And they were looking to get him, and he knew that he had a lot of enemies inside the Nation of Islam, and for him to have done that, it's like you have to think about what's happening in the background of consciousness that will cause a person to know that they're out to get him, and then give him that kind of ammunition to carry it out, because no comment means no comment. And someone was just there at the place where he made that comment about Kennedy murder is a case of chickens coming home to roost. Uh, they were just sitting. They could not believe. First of all, he opened the floor up for questions. He gave the talk, and then you leave. You have a limited time you rent the building for, and you after you talk, you leave, and what you said is what you said. But opening it up like that was the first thing that stunned a lot of the persons that were there. And I can tell you some of the ones that were on that stage. It was at that event. They were mortal enemies of Malcolm X. John Ali is one example of that. They were out to get this man, and they were in there with their hands inside of the treasury and putting money in their pocket and things like that. And he wasn't doing that. And by him staying away from that kind of corruption, that's a threat, because he can point out when you're doing the same thing they're doing, who can bring the question when they're involved in it, because in the light they bring it upon themselves as well. And here's a person not doing any of that, and he's standing out from all the rest of them, and he's a problem, and he knows that they are surrounding him, and then he loads up the guns, I claim, and then hand it over to his enemies to use against him. Now the ones who are there and doing that, they're doing a different thing in terms of them actually being involved in it. They want to remove themselves from the actual environment, but they want to plant the seed and create the environment through which this would occur. First of all, get him out of there, and that made him vulnerable. And then after that is over, then a lot of different things a chain reaction begin to happen, and it ends up in Audubon Ballroom on the 21st of February, 1965. You have to go back and just kind of do the homework and come up with some things here. What I'm going to do today, in continuing this discussion, I want to talk about Jesse Ventura's analysis of it, because Jesse Ventura, you have to give him a lot of credit. This man is fearless, and I have to give him a lot of respect, because to be out there with the kind of megaphone that he has, and I read his book, so I know he has concern of the reach that he's looking over his shoulder. He's out, he's spending half the year out of the country, and he's looking over his shoulder constantly, because that him being out there like he is and doing the things he's doing, this poses a problem for the establishment as well, and he's in some jeopardy. His book, I brought his book to the studio, called "They Killed the President." They killed our president, and it's 63 reasons to believe there was a conspiracy to assassinate JFK. And anyone that doubts that at this late date, that there was a conspiracy in place, and particularly when they consider themselves to be experts on the event that happened in Dallas. If you're doubting there was a conspiracy in Dallas on the 22nd of November, 1963, and you still have doubts about that, and you are an expert on this case, or you claim that, I have to tell you, I don't have any respect for you at this point. Not in the aftermath of even the report put out in 1978 by the Stokes Commission, which is another government investigation, where at least they came a little bit closer to it by saying that in all probability there was a conspiracy. And so that they moved a little bit toward the actual event that happened, by listening to the acoustics that occurred at that time. Well, Jesse Ventura listed 63 reasons why uh, there was a conspiracy to assassinate JFK. Now, I'm going to go through a few of them, and then I'm going to make a couple of comments about each one. But these are some of the reasons he listed. And don't go grabbing this book thinking that it's scholarly written. It's not a scholarly written book, but you have to give him credit for being willing to put this on the record and attaching his name to it. He's not doing some of these things they're doing today where they want to do a talk, but as long as you don't mention their name and they said the source, we have a source. Anytime you tell me you have a source, you don't have a name, I'm not willing to listen to a lot of what you're talking about, because if you were telling the truth, then who are you that's making the claim? Because it has something to do with whether or not you have whether or not you are believable or not. We have to know the source of the information. You can't just tell us the source. We have a source that said it, because sources can say anything. Ventura writes, uh, and he divides it up into different segments, and then he has one segment called the evidence. They say the evidence of conspiracy. Then he has in section 2 the cover up. Section 3, the eyewitnesses. Section 4, the why, the who, and the how. And I have to tell you, before the conclusion, the why, the who, and the how, how they did it. We pretty much know today. We even know who they were. We know who the shooters are. But see, everybody concentrate on that aspect of it, but not on a whole lot of other things that if there were no conspiracy and if it was not widespread, these things would not have occurred. And so I'll be talking about some of that as well. But I want to mention some of the points he makes under the evidence. Number one, we're talking about under the section 1, frontal gunshots. Now that is if you put Oswald on the 6th floor. If you do that, I don't put him on the 6th floor. I put him on the 2nd floor at the time this is happening, and he's in that cafeteria at this point. I don't think Oswald even went to the 6th floor on the day of the assassination. And I can see that he's being set up by just looking at the aftermath of what occurred afterwards. I can see that the setup was all they had already targeted and fingered Oswald as a patsy. I can tell that by putting together what occurred in the immediate aftermath of the assassination. First of all, you can't tell by anybody being in a window the height, or from a distance the physicality. They get a proper identity, a specific identity of who's in that window. If let's say you saw Oswald in that window, how could you be certain of the phenotype? How tall he is, how much he weighed? Can you tell that from looking at the person, the one that stooped down where that window was, and you up there, not even standing up from a distance from the windows, they could see the total profile of the shooter, but yet they had that down to a science. That is and I'm making this claim away from some of the other writers. They had that profile already indexed as who they were looking for, and that comes out of the fact that Lee Harvey Oswald had a controller in the CIA, and that controller was David Adley Phillips, who was also the controller for one of the shooters, who was James Sutton. They don't change his name to James Fowles. James Fowles is the one that's in the grassy knoll. But there are two shooters in the front of that limousine. They're on both sides of that street. One's in the grassy knoll, but there's a knoll over there on the other side too. And that's why I know there were two teams of shooters in Dealey Plaza. And I don't think they had contact with each other because each one knew the assignment that they had, and I don't think they knew. The evidence does not show that they knew about each other, nor was there a need for them to know each other. They just had to carry out what they were supposed to do based upon their assignment. And the shooter to the right, to the front and to the right in that grass knoll area, that's the person that's tied into the shooters over there in the Dow Tax building. And that shooter in that building is Charles Nicoletti. I'm talking about people who are now deceased, so I can say that without too much worry about getting shot. The trailer's too cold for that now. But there are a lot of people that died to cover this thing up. People are dying like flies. Anybody that had a kind of eyewitness report from what they were trying to claim happened in Dallas, they were in harm's way and were in jeopardy. And a lot of them, you'd be surprised how many persons that died that were eyewitnesses to what happened in Dallas that day. There's a reporter for they used to be on What's My Line. You may be old enough to have seen that program. And they had on there this reporter. She's always a panelist on What's My Line, and her name was Dorothy Kilgallen. Dorothy Kilgallen knew the key to to understand the assassination, really after the aftermath of Lee Harvey Oswald being killed. He was killed 2 days after the assassination of Kennedy on the 24th of November. In the aftermath of that person being killed by Jack Ruby, she then saw the key to understand this setup was no longer Lee Harvey Oswald, who they took out 2 days later. But now the key to understanding is Jack Ruby. She went to Jack Ruby's trial and sat in that courtroom during that trial. And she was the only person outside of the Warren commissioners, Gerald Ford and Earl Warren, who went into Jack Ruby's cell. I have the transcript of that meeting that was taken. That's in a book called Eyewitness, written by Harold Weisberg. And that transcript of I read that transcript, and I know what Jack Ruby was saying. Jack Ruby was trying to get them to take him out of Dallas so he could really talk about what really occurred, and almost begged Earl Warren and Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford would later on become the president of the United States, and that's interesting. That later on, it comes down to him having been a good soldier, and now he is in line after they impeached Richard Nixon, whom I'm contending, based upon the documents I read, and most important, which was the book written by Russ Baker. I think there are a number of books out there that verifies and clarifies and validates what Russ Baker says in his book called The Family of Secrets. You need to read that book. You're going to be there for a while reading it, but it's a very good book to read. And I always say that if you don't have the time to read the whole book, it will take you some time to get through it. Then just read the 2 chapters that deal with the Watergate, and you see how they set that up. Because Nixon was overthrown by the same people. And the fact that nobody's been brought to heel or placed on arrest for what happened in Dallas that group is still out here, not necessarily with the same members. Many of them have, as you would know, during the amount of time between 63 and today, this is 62 years later. Many of these persons have died, but the apparatus that was there, the the tendencies of the apparatus, that they're still there, and you saw it rearing up its ugly head again in the framing of January the 6th. That apparatus is still in place, and the CIA also. This is Moss speaking. This is my interpretation of it. Spoke very loudly in Butler, Pennsylvania, when running for the presidency for the third time was shot. The person that did the shooting, this would have been the kill shot, the headshot, and it's a headshot that the person is in the grassy knoll is watching to see if the president had been hit in the head by the time that limousine, that motorcade got up to where he was, because he's up the stretcher piece on Elm Street, and as that car turned off of Houston onto Elms, which that right there raises the question, because that turn should never be made with a president of the United States. You don't want to have the president having to slow the limousine, the president having to slow down to make a turn. You want the president to be moving at a certain speed. You don't want to turn. The speed already is slow enough, 11.67 miles an hour, but going around that turn is slower than that. And when he turns off, when that limousine turns off, the motorcade turns off of Houston Street on the Elms, that car has to make a left turn and go around to make the turn onto Elms, and that's against the protocols of the security of the president of the United States. So that's when he talks about the frontal um, gunshot. If you didn't have the Zapruder film, you would not have seen evidence of the front shot, because you would not have seen the president doing this in the Zapruder film, the Zapruder film. Abraham Zapruder, a dressmaker, was there at the scene, wanted to film it so he'd have some for his grandchildren to show them. He's there just as a spectator. Now, he's been asked to move a couple of times because he's there as a spectator, and he has his camera, and somebody that claimed to be Secret Service has asked him to move because something was obviously set up, and he's in the way of that which was set up. And they asked him to move a couple of times. Somebody asked him to move, and they were flashing badges to show him that they had authority to ask him to move. So he moved twice. But in the Abraham Zapruder film, you see the president getting, you can see the president being hit. And there's the president, and the way the president reacts. You saw the reaction in the Zapruder film around frame 313 of that film. You just slow it down and replay it and slow it down, because because when you come from behind this, the Stemmon sign, that's a sign that's announcing that the expressway is this way, and there's a sign there, and the turnoff would have been that next route. And when that shot is fired, you have to slow that thing down to see exactly at what point is the president hit at that point. Because when he comes behind that sign, all you see is the hands going up like this, and the president getting ready to clutch his throat, moving like that in the Zapruder film. So you slow it down and you try to back it up to see exactly at what point does that occur. Now, he's not hitting the back in the neck he's not hitting it in his neck in the back. That's a front shot, and I know that from the standpoint that every doctor that examined that wound before the tracheotomy was put in the president's throat to accelerate his breathing, because the president has a hard time now catching his breath. And the doctors that did that tracheotomy to open up that wound that was in the president's throat, they all saw it, and they saw it as and these were trained doctors, so we're not talking about doctors that never seen a gunshot before. And every one of the doctors that saw it claimed it was a front wound, and it was an entry wound in the president's neck. And you know that from the standpoint that when you have the entry wound, the entry wound is much smaller than the exit wound, because the entry wound goes in and it's tumbling, or if it doesn't tumble, it's still knocking out matter that it didn't have when it entered into the body. It's knocking out matter and carrying that matter with it. And don't tell me that they have a suspension of Newton's law in Dallas, where a body at rest will remain at rest unless it's interfered with by an outside force, and then moves in the direction of that force. That bullet never exits the president's body. I don't know what caliber gun that was being used, but there are two bullets in the president's body that did not exit the president's body. The one that wound that you see in that Zapruder film around frame 313, and you see the hands going up, and the president began to react to that. I kept slowing the film down, trying to hone in at just what point was that bullet fired, because the location of that firing would have shown us something that we need to understand. That shot came from the other side of the grassy knoll. Two grassy knolls here. There's one over there to the right and one over to the left. That was one team of shooters in that case there. That's not the same shooter that would fire the fatal headshot. That's a shooter to the left. There's a team there. That team would have been had one person in the front, and that team had in the back those on the sixth floor of the school book depository building. I'm gonna tell you who's on that floor. I think Oliver Stone has. I think that not Oliver Stone, Roger Stone. Roger Stone has a very good book out. Somebody needs to pay attention to Roger Stone. He doesn't come across as being an intellectual, but the man did his homework. And the book he wrote, he's a partisan, but the book he wrote is right on target about what he has uncovered. And the ones on that sixth floor of the school book depository is not Oswald up there. It's Malcolm Wallace. And Malcolm Wallace is the one that was the contractor for Lyndon Baines Johnson, who knew that Kennedy was going to be killed. That's not George Moss talking. That's Lyndon Johnson's girlfriend talking. I don't know if she's still alive or not, but she was the one that before the assassination had occurred, Johnson told her, after tomorrow, the Kennedys would not be making fun of me again, because they were making fun of this country bumpkin. Here were these sophisticated New Englanders out of Boston, New York, Boston, Massachusetts, and he was this country bumpkin down here in Texas with that southern drawl, and they were laughing at him behind his back. It didn't sound like he was the most educated man in the world. And here they were more cultured and so on. They got Johnson there. He only had him there as a showpiece because they needed Texas. Make sure you nail that down so that you would have that state. If you lose Texas, you can't win the presidency. And they had that locked down by having Johnson on the team. You have to go and look at Johnson's history to see that Johnson was definitely out there with baggage, because look at what happened in 48, the same election in which there was a question about the election of Harry S. Truman. The election 1948 in Texas got Johnson labeled Landslide Johnson, because there's an old joke that used to be around in Texas where it would say Pedro was was on the street corner crying, and he was crying because his daddy had come and he didn't stop to see him. And the guy says to him, "Well, Pedro, you know your dad is dead." And he's wiping his eyes. He said, "Well, no, because he came and voted for Johnson, and he didn't stop by to see me." And the idea was that the dead folks were voting in the 1948 election. That's been verified by a person who did a biography of Johnson that has verified that that election that brought Johnson to power was stolen. That was a stolen election as well. But then that raised the question about the election 1948 that we had with Harriet Truman, where the papers were saying Dewey wins, and then later on they'd retract that morning edition out of the New York Times and put out another edition in the afternoon because they had to retract that because Dewey did not win. Well, Dewey was not announced to have won. Let's put it that way. But anyway, the point I'm making here is that there were a number of reasons to believe just away from the just within people that were in the know. Johnson's girlfriend is one. You know, Johnson had and she was in love with Johnson. She's not trying to pull in the closet any skeletons out of the closet. She's just simply saying that she went and asked Lyndon after it had happened. She said, Lyndon, I have to know," because he had told her that after tomorrow, told Lyndon on the 21st, after tomorrow, the Kennedys will never make fun of me again. And she just was curious about him having said it the day before, and then what happened after that. She wanted to know, what did Lyndon Johnson know prior to that. And when they asked her later on down the road, a piece, Johnson's now dead at this point, but they asked her what were her thoughts about it. And although she was still in love with Lyndon Johnson, she was certainly not willing to lie about how she thought would happen based upon what he said to her. And Johnson was in know about that assassination prior to it taking place. In fact, he wanted to know once the shooting had occurred, and you hear a conversation between him and who was he talking to? Who was Johnson? Who was Johnson talking to? He was talking to I think he was talking to Helms. Richard. I think he's talking to Richard Helms. He wanted to know were any of the bullets fired at him. He was assured to know all the bullets were fired at the president. They weren't trying to kill him. They were trying to put him up. They were trying to eliminate him, the president, so that he would be up there in that suite, in that place where the president was. So they kind of to say there. When I hear people say like Jared Posner, I don't have any respect for Jared Posner. I can't respect a man that would come out at this late date and say things that Jared Posner is still saying 62 years later. He's still saying this. I can't respect him because the man has done some study. But when you have write a book in the aftermath of all of these this evidence has come out since that time period, and you're writing a book called Case Closed, and that you found only one person involved in it, didn't have any help, and he acted alone, and that's Lee Harvey Oswald, and that's what your conclusions are. I can't respect you because that doesn't have any weight. Oswald didn't shoot anybody that day. He didn't shoot John F. Kennedy, and he did not shoot J.D. Tippit. I've seen a picture of the man who shot Tippit, but that person that shot Tippit had gone there to shoot Oswald. They were going to shoot Oswald on his way to the theater. That tells me that tells me we need to find out why was Oswald, who left the school book depository building, is now going to a theater. Why have you asked the question? Why are all those officers at that theater? Because somebody reported that somebody went into the theater without buying a ticket. And why would a man who is involved in that crime of that magnitude go into the theater without buying a ticket and drawing attention to himself? And then what is this about going to the theater? Where about 12 officers converged because they had a report that somebody went into the theater and didn't buy a ticket and went into the theater. There's a team that's supposed to kill Oswald on his way to the theater. They knew that this was the plan. They had already this was already orchestrated. I'm here to tell Jared Posner that book you wrote, you can't you cannot be you cannot be taken seriously. You can't say things like case is closed because the Clay case is very much open. You have to explain how, if there's no conspiracy, how is it that when the shots rang out and the people ran to the grassy knoll to the president's right and to the front of the motorcade, why they all ran up the grassy knoll up that hill where they thought that shot came from, and they saw puffs of smoke and things like that. Why they ran up that hill, and why did they stop? Who stopped them? People that were showing Secret Service credentials were stopping them and asking, "Where are you going?" And told them, "If you don't stop, you could get shot." We now know there was no Secret Service in that Dealey Plaza. Yet they all had badges. A lot of people were flashing badges in Dealey Plaza. And where did those badges come from?
If you want to go further back, and I think the point is like I keep on asking, allegedly Lee Harvey Oswald denounced his U.S. citizenship, went to the Soviet Union, came back. I don't know how long of a time he came back long enough. He was there long enough to actually meet a woman, bring her back with her after because he was married. Why was he allowed back in the country? I would like to know that. I mean, I don't know why. I mean, especially in that era, with tension so intense.
Mhm.
Why did they let him back in the country? And if he was allowed in the back in the country, and they should have had him under scrutiny or maybe in a jail cell or something like that, awaiting determination, but they allowed him back very nonchalantly back into the country's mix.
And there's a reason why they did that, because Lee Harvey Oswald was a double agent. Lee Harvey Oswald, this idea you just can uh, go out of the country, go in the Soviet Union, and come back, and and nothing is going to happen to you and let you back in the country like that. Can't happen. Oswald was working for the CIA. There's no doubt about the fact he was an agent. He was an agent of the CIA.
Well, look, just during the Biden administration, after the January 6th incident, okay, whatever you want to call it, the Biden administration sought to set out Secret Service, FBI, all these agencies to go ferret out the people who had been just merely in Washington D.C. at the time,
Yeah,
and try to bring them to alleged justice.
yeah. Look at how they were determined to identify people that were, some of them were wearing they able to go and look at face recognition to figure them out. They were rounding up people uh, just if they were in Washington that day and did not even go into the building. They just simply went through the files and found out who was there. They knew. James Files is a good case in point. His name was James Sutton. He changed his name to James Files, and Files didn't know that they knew that he was in Dallas on the 22nd of November. And how they know? They simply looked. They went. What they did is go and look at who is in these hotels around the Dallas area prior to the assassination, and then when they check out of the hotel, you can find out a lot just by that. What are they doing in town? Files didn't even know that they knew he was in Dallas, but he found out through looking at later on. It came out they were aware of Files, a guy named Shelton. I think his name was Jack Shelton, who was FBI. They were aware of Files in '64. Files didn't know that they knew about him. They knew about him in '64. They knew about him because because he come out of Chicago into Dallas a week before the assassination, and then after the assassination, he's not there anymore. And when you find out who Files was and what he's connected to, you can see here the links there, because Files is tied into Nicoletti, Charles Nicoletti, and Nicoletti's tied into Johnny Rosselli. and there and John Rosselli being the liaison between the mafia and the CIA. You can read Charles Ashman's book about that. These people, you couldn't even tell where the mob started and stopped, and where the government agents, the law enforcers, and the law abiding people on the other side of the law, you couldn't tell where there's one or the other because they were so closely linked. You couldn't tell where the good guys were because the good guys are mixed in with the bad guys, or the bad guys mixed in with the good guys. This was a well-planned murder of a president of the United States, and they got away with it. And that apparatus that was in place at that time, that apparatus has not been taken down. That's why it's such a threat even today, because unless that is brought to heel, first of all, brought to the public and made to heel by exposure and by somebody going to jail. I noticed that all these things that are happening in this country now, nobody's going to jail. How does that happen if the government is going to correct itself? And we know some things out there that should not have been going on, and some things were legally in place at that time. 62 years later, not one person has been arrested as a result of that. Not one person. And by the way, in terms of the January 6th thing, not one person has been charged about insurrection. Not one. You can make a lot of claims in the press, but where are the arrests based upon the claims you made? You say we had an insurrection on January 6, 2021. Okay, fine. Let's see the arrest being made based upon the claim that you made. None have been arrested based upon that. And that guy with the horns, this guy named Charsley, they didn't know that this was this was a very smart man, and he may have looked like he was some crazy crackpot, but when he came out and made comments later on that they had let him go. By the way, when Tucker Carlson made was doing some things, this may have gotten Tucker Carlson fired from Fox. Can you imagine that the number one person that was on Fox? This man was a cash cow for Fox because he's leading into Fox dominating the ratings after in the zone where the ratings are like made. You have to be able to impact the audience between 7 and let's say 7 and 10. So your programming that they're going to do the ratings based upon you pulling people to your network at that point. 7 o'clock rating, the 7 o'clock slide, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. And if you can kind of go to 10 o'clock, you got that 4-hour block locked up. That's where the ratings are made. And Carson was a lead-in to Sean Hannity. So he was, everybody was watching that because Carson was bringing them to that TV set for his program. And then they would watch Sean Hannity, they'd watch Laura Ingraham and things like that. You have to do something you have to do something that really is raising eyebrows for them to do what they did to Tucker Carlson. But when Carson started going into these little areas and open up these cans of worms and doing certain kinds of investigation, he was like a loose cannon out there. And it was either them, it's either Tucker Carlson has to go, or you bring this heat on that network, and they got the number one host of that network at that time, get him out of there.
The only two people I find like I have any value, considered journalists or whatever, are Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens. I mean, these people have taken and also another thing too. Dave Bondi, a local guy. I don't know if you've heard of Dave Bondi. He was a local reporter. They went off on his own because he didn't like the way the coverage was always skewed to the left.
Yeah.
And you can join this thing. It's on through Facebook. You can join. Actually, we're $5 a month to join. You could leave anytime, but it supports him in his efforts to try to be an independent news source.
Mm-hmm.
But I really have amazing respect for him because he took a serious hit financially to do this. But Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, they've had death threats. They've been the one of the former Israeli the ambassador to Israel during Trump's first era, the first period of being the president, was actually calling for the arrest of Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and wants them in prison. They wanted to strip them of their money and everything else. So I mean, this goes that's how gutsy the journalists are. I mean, I wouldn't have the guts to do that.
Yeah,
If I had the resource, I might be willing to attempt it because I've been threatened to be killed before by local thugs, and it doesn't bother me much, But you just constant vigilance. But I mean,
it takes courage to set up and do things they're doing. It takes courage. If you're not willing to take the consequences of the actions you're taking, and you don't understand the consequences, and you get out there like that, and you're so naive thinking that you can do this without any kind of happenstance, and they're going to applaud you. Look at how they're treating Elon Musk. Is just one example of that. They're not going to be clapping. They're going to be probably your worst enemies.
look, even if his company rescued the two stranded astronauts or whatever, some people said there was no astronauts. I don't know, but anyway, despite that, and I know you're different fields, but I mean, look at all the money he put out from his company.
Yeah.
Did he get compensated for it? I didn't hear anything about compensation for it. Did you? No. And he brought him back, but no, he's boo hiss. I mean,
yeah,
Elon Musk, it's just insane,
Yeah, he's a patriot, and if you're a patriot, you got a problem. Because a lot of persons in this country, you'd be surprised that person are pulling against this country. And this idea that you're gonna make America great again, they ain't all on that page to make the country great again. Some of them are putting the weight of the country down. They don't want to make this country great. They want to do this country in. It stands in the way of the Marxist vent. They're trying to push this thing into Marxism, and these persons are in the way. Nationalism is in the way of Marxism. And if you're gonna make this country more nationalists, you're making it less Marxist. And they don't want that. They want to transform this country out of the image of Madison into the image of Karl Marx. That's their goal. This is a globalist goal that they've set. And these persons are in the way. Trump is in the way. Elon Musk is in the way. And that's what you're seeing play out on that stage right now. You should be applauding Elon Musk. Elon Musk is the one that went into Twitter before it became, X, and cleaned that up and made it more efficient with 1/7 of the manpower, and they broke it down so that it didn't lose any efficiency, but he reduced it down by 6/7 of the manpower that was there when he got there, and they brought that energy over into the government to find government waste the same way. That's a no-no, and that's why he's having the problems he's having. This man's a patriot. And it takes courage to do what he's doing. And by the way, he's not leaving because they're scaring him away from the task there. He was, if you were working more than 130 days of the federal government, then you are really considered to be a contract worker of the government. And he does not want that time down because he got his fingers, too many fingers in different parts of the American pie. And that just makes it restrains him too much. So he's got the ball rolling, and now he wants to go on and do some of the other things he's doing in his other enterprises, because that's not the only thing he does. This man is a multi genius we're dealing with here. And that idea, he just came to do some service for the country because he changed over from the Democratic Party when they loved him, buying his cars and things like that. The Tesla was a very good car. It's still a very good car. The imagery of the person that's making it. He's only 12% owner, by the way, of that. But he's lost popularity because he began to inflame the left, and the left does not want to have this country to recover from what they did to it, to bring it down. They've done too much work and too much time invested in bringing it down, and for those persons trying to bring it back, that's a persona non grata position for them to take. They don't like Trump. They loved Trump before he ran for president. They don't like Trump, and they don't like Elon Musk. And the hatred of the two of them is about the same. Elon Musk now more so than Trump, because the limelight is on Elon Musk, because Elon Musk is the one that's driving the efficiency of the government. This man is, in fact, finding waste here and waste there and waste everywhere to show that we are paying taxes to criminals in Washington. That's how they're getting all this money in their bank account. All these persons go to Washington to get rich, and Elon Musk is exposing that. They can't stand that heat. They want Elon Musk out of here, and he better be very careful too. Trump better be extra careful. They already tried twice to get him, and that's the apparatus that's put in place is in Dealey Plaza. Anyway, the point I was trying to make here was that the person that claimed there's no conspiracy in Dallas, that this man, a single person, did that. You can see by the fact that the first shot that we see in the Zapruder film, and that's not the first time the president hit. The president was hit before that in the back, not in the area where he can exit out of his throat and start jumping up and down and going all haywire and doing all that. That's a different shot. The shot that hit John Connolly in the front seat is a different shot than one that hit Kennedy in the back. That bullet in his back didn't come out of his back. That bullet is still there. That bullet was still in Kennedy's body. And the bullet that was in his throat, that bullet didn't come out either. I don't know what caliber was used, but those two bullets were in Kennedy's body. That bullet that was in Kennedy's back is that bullet that fell out on that. There are two different reports about that bullet on a stretcher. I think the one that reported that he put that bullet on the stretcher as a way of just simply wanted to make sure the evidence was not lost, put it on that stretcher. I know the person that said he put it on the stretcher. I understand that, but there's a bullet. There's also a bullet in the back cushion of that limousine. That bullet came from the front, and that windshield has a hole in it because that bullet that hit Ken in the throat, that bullet had been slowed up. That's why it didn't come out of the president's body, because it had been slowed up by hitting that windshield. And we know that windshield was hit because that windshield bullet was seen when they parked that car at Parkland Hospital, and people walked by and they saw that bullet wound, and they could see that was the front. That shot was from the front. It was from the front. That right there eliminates the idea of a single shooter, because Oswald supposed to be in the back of the limousine. Now this is a shot coming from the front. The president has been shot from the back, but this shot right here from the front, the one in Zapruder film number the one that lands on that camera with Zapruder's film, frame 313. That frame shows that was a front wound. The president does not do this. He does that. That bullet comes in the press. That bullet is an entry wound from the front through that windshield. You can see that hole there, and that's probably the second shot. That is the second shot that hit the president. Not the first. That's not the second shot that was fired. I think there were probably as many as I'm very conservative here. I think there were more than this, but I'm going to say I can account for about 6 or 7 shots. But I would not be surprised if there were as many as 11 shots that were fired. Of course, the person is saying 3. But they say 3 because 3 are the number of bullets that were, but the number of shells were found on the 6th floor of the school book depository. But that was planted on there prior to the shooting that occurred, because that's where the framing of Oswald was going to take place. That's why that motorcade was routed the way it was routed off of Houston onto Elm Street. They carried by that building because that's the framing of Oswald that was intended. They knew Oswald was in that building. And those 3 shells that were found were planted on that floor, so as to make it appear that 3 shots were in fact fired. That's where they get the idea of 3 bullets. They had to make that fit the evidence, because how does all these wounds, how does that occur by 3 shots? That's why you have to create the magic bullet, because how do you get the president shot all of that number of times, and then Connolly is shot, and then all that happens in 6 seconds, and you got 3 bullets to account for it. That's why you have the later on the senator from Pennsylvania that came up with this idea that there's this idea of the magic bullet. You ought to see what that bullet had to do to wound to create 7 wounds in 2 people's bodies, where the bullet supposedly wouldn't have gone into Candace's neck in the back, and then came out the front to account for that bullet wound in the front, and then began to do all kinds of acrobatics in order to then go down and around and up and down and then over to the right. He hit Connolly, and then it did so many things in Connolly's body, exiting out and hit him in his wrist and then in his throat. No bullet can do that. All if you go and I've seen diagrams of what that bullet had to do. No bullet can do that because it defies all the laws of physics. There is no question, 100%, there is no question that there was a conspiracy, and that conspiracy is very comprehensive and very widespread. Now, about the people that had credentials in Dealey Plaza, we now know from the evidence that there were no Secret Service agents on the ground in Dealey Plaza. So where did those badges come from? Because they were flashing Secret Service badges. Now, where did those badges come from? I can tell you where those badges came from. Those badges came from Los Angeles. They were made in Los Angeles. And they were passed to Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby now. And the person that passed it off to Jack Ruby was Johnny Rosselli. You remember Jack Ruby was the one that later on will kill Oswald and close his mouth up. When you understand that, Jerry Posner, you're not writing that book. Case closed. This case is very much open until some people are named. I'm not talking about this shooting occurred here and that shooting occurred. I'm talking about naming some names of the people who were actively involved in it and how they were involved. Jack Ruby wanted to tell them his part of what he knew, but he knew he couldn't tell it in Dallas. And when I read that transcript of him telling Earl Warren and telling Gerald Ford later on to become president, after he had removed Nixon from power, Gerald Ford stepped up into the presidency and he was now made the president. I found that very interesting. But having told Gerald Ford and Earl Warren, the reluctant Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, that his life was in danger, and asked him if they could get him out of here and carry him back to Washington where he could talk. And then what was really interesting looking at their response was they acted like they didn't even hear the man and said to him, "Well, there's nothing else then. We've done our job by coming here to talk to you." They act like they didn't hear him telling him that he needs to get out of there because he could not talk freely. And he did tell him he thought his life was in danger, which it was. Ruby will die of cancer. And that was part of that's part of those persons were dying like flies connected to the assassination. About 100 persons that actually died altogether, either eyewitnesses or people that saw something and were talking about it, and then their mouth had to be closed and so on, and it wasn't part of the narrative. It's a lot of people that like that. I was saying Dorothy Kilgallen was like that. This woman was onto something. She had understood that this was a very large conspiracy, and she was trying to get to the bottom of it. And that caused Dorothy Kilgallen, a great reporter, honest reporter. She was saying to people around her, "I'm gonna crack this case wide open." Well, not really. She went the same way that Marilyn Monroe went. Because Marilyn Monroe was involved with John F. Kennedy, was one of his mistresses, many others as well. And that was a brothel they were having up there in the White House under John F. Kennedy. And after Marilyn Monroe and John F. Kennedy had been a liaison for a period of time, Robert Kennedy picked up with her. And you'd be surprised at how many persons were going back and forth on that pillar from John F. Kennedy's pillar to Sam Giancana's pillar. There was a lot of interconnectedness going on in terms of a whole range of things going on with the government, organized government, and then the mobsters who were not part of the government but organized. And you had organized crime, and you had organized crime meeting each other from different vested interests. And the camaraderie was that they had some things in common. They were not the same team necessarily. They're different teams, but they have common interests. You can go and study the common interests by looking at Charles Ashman's book, The Mafia CIA Link. Go and read those books. And then come back and tell Jerry Posner that there's no way in the world that he can contend with all this evidence out here that this case is closed, or that he found out that there was no help that Oswald had. And it's just interesting that Oswald's has is he had children. Oswald's children have to bear that burden of being linked to a murder that their father did not commit. Oswald was exactly what he said it was. He was a patsy who understood once it had occurred, so that all this going back and forth and being sent here and sent there, going abroad and supposedly he renounced his citizenship, all that stuff was CIA. You don't leave and come back like that. The question people need to ask when he came back to the United States is how can he come back to the United States and not go to jail? They kept tabs on Oswald. But Oswald was working for the government even at that point. His renunciation of his citizenship, that's CIA. I know that for a fact because I know the controller that they had a controller that Oswald had the same controller that James Files had. They had a controller, and the controller was the persons over the CIA over Latin American affairs, and that CIA liaison person over Latin American affairs was David Atlee. What was David Atlee's? Was it Robert David Atlee? He's the one that was the controller of both Oswald and James Files, and that's who Oswald was going to meet after the assassination had occurred. That's why when they called the officers and told the person sneaking to the into that theater, they knew that was the person they were looking for. You can't tell that from that window. But look how they converged on that theater. And when they converged in that theater and went to the projection room and told the projection room to turn the lights up and so on and so forth, and they were swarming down on that floor where Oswald was down there, not in the balcony, but downstairs. And they swarmed on Oswald. What Oswald said was start singing that in that theater loudly, I'm not resisting arrest. I'm not resisting arrest, because he now figured this thing out, and he knows that they were on his trail. He knew that. He knew the setup at that point. And now his mouth got to be closed because Oswald began to talk. And I tell you what I want you to look at when you go and look at the different photographs in there. Look at the fact that Jack Ruby began to stalk Lee Harvey Oswald. When Oswald was coming down and was making comments, you see pictures of Jack Ruby listening in very carefully to what's being said. And Oswald's now beginning to talk. And there's Jack Ruby around Oswald twice that I've seen before the shooting. And then look at James Lavelle coming down when they brought Oswald down. Don't you think they should have cleaned out all the people that were down in that basement of that police precinct before they brought him down there? And why is Jim Lavelle dressed differently than all the rest of them? The man's wearing what in the photographs, it was like a white suit, beige or something like that, very light suit. The one that Oswald is in fact handcuffed to. Why is Lavelle dressed differently than the rest of the men? The rest of the men are men in black. Lavelle's wearing a white suit, or looked like a white suit through the photograph. He's handicapped that person there. And Oswald has no problem in that crowded place to identify where Oswald was, because where that guy was wearing that suit, Oswald is handcuffed to him. I've seen the photographs of it. I saw the setup because Oswald had to be. Now that he's talking, Oswald got to have his mouth closed because Oswald knows he's been set up. And he's also saying when they were bringing him down there, when he said, "I'm just a pastor," and they put him into that room real quickly and got him out of there. Go look at the evidence. Go look at the things that were happening. They put him into that room, got away from those reporters. How is Lavelle, by the way, who is one of the persons in that room when Oswald was being interrogated, how do you interrogate a man that you claim was the one that shot the president of the United States and nobody takes their notes on it? What did Oswald say in that room when they were interrogating him? No notes were taken. They had their man prior to the shooting, and they'd already framed that Lee Harvey Oswald. And I will tell you this also: they had Kennedy targeted in a number of cities. Whichever city he went into, they're going to get him in one of those cities. That's why it says here, after saying the frontal gunshots, there were two gunshots from the front. The one in his throat was one shot, but the president was shot twice in the head, and those shots are 1/1000th of a second apart because the person in the grassy knoll had been told don't fire unless it's necessary, because they want all the shots coming from the back. They wanted those shots from the back because they were going to put that shooting and claim it was in the Dealey Plaza, in the school book depository at Dealey Plaza, and to have a shooter in the front, that was showing conspiracy. They want those shots coming from the back. The shooter in the front, James Fowles, had been told by by Charles Nicoletti that don't fire unless they had not finished the job, because it should have been finished up there a little closer to turning onto Elm Street from Houston. But that was the backup was up Elm Street a little further down, and if he had not been hit in the head, because going for a headshot, by the time he got down to that part of Elm Street, then Fowles was up there in the Dealey Plaza. He's up there in the Dealey Plaza because that's been checked out by the fact that he left his calling card, and they found the calling card. He said he left there, and nobody knew about it until it was discovered years later, and that was he bit the bullet as a way of he had a certain kind of arrogance. He's a young guy, a certain amount of arrogance, and he bit the bullet and put it on that stupid thing he did. He says later on the stupid thing he did, but he bit that bullet as a way of showing he had been there. They found that bullet later on. So anyway, the point is that we got 60. These are not even 5 of the reasons, but they killed our president. 63 reasons to believe there was a conspiracy to assassinate JFK. There are many more reasons than the 63 mentioned in this book here. These are some very good reasons, though, but there are others as well. We know there was a conspiracy to kill the president because we know that people were walking around with credentials in Dealey Plaza, and we know that the Secret Service did not have any agents in Dealey Plaza that day. And for them to have those badges in Dealey Plaza right there shows you how widespread this thing was, because they were going to get Kennedy, because Kennedy was in the way of a lot of things here. And next week we'll talk about what happened after the assassination of John F. Kennedy, because a lot of direction this country was going in, that direction was changed later on, and the total direction changed in the aftermath of that assassination. Okay, we're still moving to the climax of it, but that's pretty much the story for the day. We want to pick it up next week, the same time. They killed our president, and we want to get to the bottom of it, and we want some answers. Until next week, we want you to follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.